Hello and welcome to ABA Made Easy. I'm Mauricio, and today we'll be going over the first section of the RBT exam, data collection and graphing. For those of you new to the channel, my name is Mauricio. I'm a child neurologist specializing in epilepsy and neurodevelopmental disabilities, and I was previously a BCABA. For those who already took the RBT exam and are just coming by to say what's up, what's up? Help your fellow colleagues below, comment with them, tell them what the experience was like, help each other out. It's a little community. But I hear you loud and clear. You want a new updated clutch exam review for the new RBT exam 2026 and onwards. You've come to the right place. Today we'll be talking about data collection and graphing. But if you haven't seen the previous video in this playlist, I highly recommend you watch that one before moving on to this one. I go over what you need to take the exam and a few study tips that are crucial for you to pass the exam. So the link is down below for the playlist of the whole Clutch RBT review exam series. Go see that video first and then come back over here and we'll continue. Also, just so you know, I've made other videos on this channel that are much more in-depth, going into each of the ABA terminologies in a lot more detail. So when I reach a point in this review where you could use a little bit more examples or a more in-depth review, I'll reference it. I'll put the link up there in one of those like screen annotation things, and I'll also put the link down in the description. But this Clutch exam review series is supposed to be a quick, to the point, this is what you have to know for the exam. Listen to me like podcast form because you like my soothing voice type of thing. I do recommend that you print out the task sheet and take notes as you go. And if you make it to the end of the series, you might have a surprise. So, spoiler alert. All right, let's get started. A1, implement continuous measurement procedures. Continuous measurement, what is that? So think of it as you are continually measuring, so you're going to catch every single instance of the behavior. That'll help you remember the difference between continuous and discontinuous. These include frequency, rate, duration, latency, and interresponse time. And this is crucial. For the exam, it's not enough just to memorize definitions. You have to be able to incorporate these definitions into real-world scenarios. So let's go into a little bit more detail about these measurements. If you want a really in-depth video, there is a link to one I made in the past. It's also in the description if you want to go a little bit more in depth. So frequency, or count, is when you count every single time the behavior occurs. So if it occurs, you put a check mark or a tally mark or click it with a clicker to be able to count those instances of behavior. So you're going to count each one. This is good for short behaviors which have a very clear beginning and end, like kicking, biting, jumping, clapping. You get it. Next one is rate. This one is how much the behavior occurs per time. And I think it's a little bit better than just frequency. This is because, let's say your session is twice as long and you count twice as many behaviors. It doesn't necessarily mean that the behavior is increasing. It's just that you had a longer session to record more behaviors. So in order to make it consistent across sessions, you could divide it by how much time you spent in the session. And so that is rate. So an example would be 5 claps an hour. Then duration. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's how long a behavior is from the onset to the offset of the behavior. Latency is how long it takes the learner to respond to your request. At least that's when it's most often used. If you want to be technical about it, or more general, it's the time between the onset of the stimulus and the initiation of the response. Then you have interresponse times, or IRT, because behavior analysts like letters a lot because they think it makes them sound cool. IRT is the time between two successive responses. So this is good for something like eating, like taking bites of food or sipping water. Let's say they're taking 10 minutes between every bite of food. You would want to shorten that interval. Or let's say they're taking a sip every half a second. Then maybe you want to lengthen that interval. That's when you use IRT. A2, implement discontinuous measurement procedures. So we just talked about continuous measurement where you're trying to get every single behavior. Discontinuous measurement is a little different. You just have to remember that it includes the intervals and momentary time sampling, and that's it. So instead of catching every single behavior that occurs, you're getting a sample of what happens. Let's go into the intervals first. So let's say you have a 1 hour session and you divide it into 6 intervals. Intervals are just sections of time. So those 6 intervals will be 10 minutes each. The first 10 minutes, second 10 minutes, and so on. So you split a 1 hour session into 6 intervals. For whole interval, the behavior has to occur during the whole interval. So let's say you're measuring studying and you define studying as looking at your book and holding a pencil in hand. That's how you define studying in this example. In order to get a check mark for the first interval, you have to be engaged and with a book, looking at your book and holding a pencil in hand for the entire first 10 minutes. If, let's say, the learner has their book and they have their pencil and they do this for 8 minutes, but in the last 2 minutes, they're not really paying attention, they put their pencil down and they take out their phone, then they don't get a check mark. Even though they did most of the interval, they didn't do the whole interval, so you don't count it. After that first interval, then the next interval starts. So at minute 10, the next interval starts. And you do the same thing. You look to see if they're engaged in the behavior the whole time. So it's either yes, they were engaged the whole time, or no, they were not engaged the whole time. Whole interval recording is good if you want to increase behavior. For partial interval recording, use the same intervals as before. So back to our example of 1 hour split up into 10-minute intervals. You are looking to see if they engage in the behavior for part of the interval. So for example, let's say you're measuring saying words. If in the first 10 minutes they don't say any words, it's a 0. They don't get a check mark. They didn't engage in any part of that interval, so it doesn't count. Then you wait till the next interval, so 10 minutes to 20 minutes. And then they say 25 words. So you just check it off once. Yes, they did say a word during this interval. And then in the third interval, they just say 1 word. Still, same check mark, yes or no. They engaged in it or they didn't engage in it. Partial interval is useful for decreasing behavior. And the last one for discontinuous measurement is momentary time sampling. In this one, you choose a specific time that you're going to record the behavior. So let's say 3 p.m. So at 3 p.m., you look up and you see if the learner is engaged in the behavior. If they are, then you put a check mark. If they're not, then you don't count it. It's a 0. So when is this useful? For big groups. And remember that because that's what they're going to test you on the exam. So imagine you're a teacher and you want to see if people are on task. So you choose 3 o'clock as your momentary time for time sampling. 3 o'clock rolls around, you look up, and then you see out of your 20 students, 15 are on task, 5 are not on task. So it's really good for big groups. Remember that. A3, implement permanent product recording procedures. What's a permanent product? It's a permanent product. Let me explain. It's essentially measuring behavior, but by the result and permanent product that they produce. So for example, if you're measuring punching the walls, you could use the holes in the wall as a permanent product. Or if you're measuring taking an exam, a completed exam assignment, which you could see that they finished, would be considered a permanent product, measuring that behavior. In order to have a good permanent product, you have to make sure that the only thing causing that permanent product to occur is the behavior that you're measuring. So let's go back to the example of holes in the wall. If you're using that to measure someone punching the wall, you better make sure there's no wild goat running around making holes in the wall, because that could influence what you're measuring. A4, enter data and update graphs. So this refers to your discrete trial training, or DTT. It's essentially when you're sitting at a table one-on-one with the learner, and this is what most people think of when they think of ABA. During this time, you should be taking discrete trial data on discrete trial data sheets. And at the end of the session, you put all this data into a summary sheet, and you graph it in a summary graph. This will give you an idea of how progress is going and what to focus on for the next session. It's also extremely useful for your supervisor. At the end of the month, you should summarize all this data into a monthly data sheet and graph, and that'll show you the trends throughout the month. All right, next section, we're halfway through. A5, describe behavior and environment in observable and measurable terms. What does this mean? Operational definition. I alluded to it earlier, but it's very important that you define a behavior very well. You can't choose upset as the definition, for example, because upset is going to mean different things for different people. So if you have multiple RBTs on a case, and let's say upset is a definition, everyone's going to measure that differently, and everyone's going to get different results, and the data is going to be all over the place, and it's not going to work out. So what do? We choose a good operational definition. This definition of a behavior is specific, and it's in observable terms. It also has a very discrete beginning and end. So instead of upset or tantrum, a better definition you could use is the child is on the floor and crying, and the behavior ends when the child is not on the floor and not crying for 2 minutes. Why do we have to define it this way? Because let's say you have a child, they're crying on the floor, okay? They stand up, and then 1 minute later, they're back on the floor crying and screaming. Do you count that as 1? Do you count that as 2? Well, per our definition, the behavior ends after they're not engaging in crying on the floor for 2 minutes. So this would still be part of the same behavior instance. That's why it's so important to define your operational definition in very specific, observable tones with a very clear beginning or end. How do you know if you have a good operational definition? Inter-observer agreement, or IOA, because letters. Essentially what you do is you have two people measuring the behavior. It could be a video of the behavior, or you could both secretly be marking the instances of behavior in your sheet. And then at the end of that time, you compare to see how much of the behavior you both marked. And if it's over 80% agreement between you two, then you have a good definition. A6, calculate and summarize data in different ways. When a BCBA reviews your data, the raw data is usually not enough. You have to summarize that data so that you could visualize the trends a little bit better. This is crucial because it tells you if the learner is making progress. You should be able to calculate rate, mean or average, duration, and percentage. Rate would be frequency divided by time, like we talked about earlier. So let's give an example. If a child is having 15 tantrums in a 30-minute session, what is the rate per hour? The answer is 30 tantrums per hour. This is because you had 15 tantrums, you divide it by 0.5 because it's half an hour, and that gives you your total of 30. So be able to make these calculations really quick for the exam. Mean duration is the total duration divided by the number of occurrences. So this lets you get an average of how long the behavior is occurring for. So let's say you're measuring the duration of screaming. If you had 3 instances of screaming, the first one was 20 seconds, the second one was 25 seconds, and the last one was 15 seconds, what's the mean duration? What you do is you add them all together, that gives you 60, and you divide it by how many times it happened, that's 3. So the average duration is 20 seconds. Then percentage. You divide correct by total opportunities and then multiply that by 100 to get the percent. I know you've taken exams before. That's essentially how you measure what your score is on an exam. So if someone gets 18 correct responses and they had 20 opportunities, what's the percent? 18 divided by 20. And you multiply that by 100, and that will give you 90%. A7, identify trends in graphed data. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and sometimes it takes a graph to better visualize the data. You could see if it's increasing, decreasing, or not really changing. This is useful because it tells you if your intervention is working, and ABA is an evidence-based technique. So if an intervention is not working, you should change the intervention. Once you graph your data, then you use visual analysis. So you look at it, then you could focus on the trend, level, and variability. You should get really comfortable looking at these graphs. So just the basics of a graph. You have your x-axis, which is the horizontal part of it, the y-axis, which is the vertical part of it. The x-axis, the majority of the time, signifies time. So day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. And the y-axis signifies a number or how many. So here's an example of an increasing or accelerating trend. The data points are consistently rising, meaning the behavior is getting more frequent or longer. Now this is an example of a decreasing or decelerating trend. The data show that it slopes downwards, signifying a reduction in behavior. This right here is a stable or flat trend. As you can see, there's very little change over time. It maintains about the same level. So this means that the intervention either isn't effective or needs adjustment, or let's say you got it to a point where you want to keep it, it means that it's been stable and no changes need to be made. All right, last section, let's go. A8, describe the risks associated with unreliable data collection and poor procedural fidelity. Accurate data and consistent implementation are the foundation of ethical and effective ABA. Unreliable data can lead to incorrect conclusions, flawed treatment decisions, or even harm. This is because it can make a behavior look like it's improving when it isn't, or vice versa, leading to continuing an ineffective treatment or discontinuing one that actually worked. This wastes precious time. Brain plasticity, or the ability to learn when you're younger, peaks when you're the youngest. So you really want to optimize this time for learning, and having inaccurate data can waste time and slow progress. The most important thing here is to be accurate and honest about your data. You could feel that's personal, that maybe you're not doing a good job in implementing an intervention, but don't lie in the data. That's the worst thing you could do. You want to have accurate data, show it to your supervisor, and if it's not working, then you see if it's the intervention that's not working, or maybe the way you're implementing it, and you get some feedback. The important thing is stay honest. All right, now we're gonna do some rapid fire practice questions. And practice questions are really important before you take this exam. There's some questions banks out there that you could check out. I'm gonna include a few questions in my series. Maybe I'll make a question bank someday. But for now, you could use one called ABA Rocks. That's the one that most people use, at least that I've seen in the comments. So check that out. Seems like a good resource. Remember, you have about 1 minute per question. So after I ask the question, if you want to time yourself and give yourself time to think about the question, pause the video, and then when you're ready, press play, but don't give yourself more than 1 minute. Question 1. What type of data collection does this describe? The therapist records how many seconds pass between saying, touch your nose, and the learner beginning to move their hand towards their face. Select the best answer from these choices. A, latency, B, frequency, C, duration, or D, interresponse time. All right, pause here if you need a few seconds to think about it. The answer is A, latency. Remember, this is the time between your request and the learner beginning to initiate the response. Frequency is how often things happen, duration is how long it is, and interresponse time is the time between each response. Next question. What type of data collection does this describe? During snack time, the RBT measures the amount of time that passes between each bite of food. The goal is to reduce excessively long pauses so lunch doesn't last until dinner. Select the best answer from these choices. A, latency, B, duration, 3, interresponse time, or D, frequency? All right, pause here if you need a few more seconds. The answer is C, interresponse time, or IRT. I just described what these were, so let's move on. Which of the following behaviors would be best measured using frequency data collection? Select the best answer from these choices. A, time spent crying during circle time. B, number of times a learner claps after being told clap hands. C, time between instruction and response. Or D, length of tantrum. The answer is B, number of times a learner claps after being told clap hands. Remember, frequency data is good for those behaviors that have a very short time span and that have a very clear beginning or end. So clapping is a great example of that. For some of these other choices, maybe duration would be a better mode to measure these in. Next question. What type of data collection does this describe? An RBT divides a 30-minute session into 5-minute intervals. If the learner engages in screaming at any point during the interval is marked as occurring. Which of the following is the best answer? A, whole interval. B, momentary time sampling. C, partial interval. Or D, frequency. The answer is C, partial interval. And that's because you mark it if it occurs at any point in the interval. Whole interval would be if he's engaging in screaming the entire interval. So an entire 5 minutes, that would be whole interval. But you wouldn't want that, right? Because you're trying to decrease behavior. So that's another clue. Partial interval is good for decreasing behavior, and that's the answer. Next question. What type of data collection does this describe? Every 10 minutes, a teacher quickly scans the classroom to see who is on task at that exact moment. No time to watch continuously. There are 28 kids and 1 coffee. Select the best answer of these choices. A, partial interval. B, whole interval. C, momentary time sampling. D, duration. The answer is C, momentary time sampling. Remember, this is good for when you have big groups. You have a big group of students, momentary time sampling. It's a giveaway. Let's do 3 more questions. Which of the following is the best example of a permanent product? Select the best answer from these choices. A, timing how long a learner cries. B, counting each vocal protest. C, a completed math worksheet after independent work. Or D, recording whether a behavior occurred during an interval. The answer is C, a completed math worksheet after independent work. This is because this is a product that you could see after the behavior occurred and it measures what you want, in this case, independent work. What type of data collection does this describe? A BCBA compares the number of tantrums across sessions of different lengths by calculating tantrums per hour. Select the best answer from these choices. A, frequency. B, duration. C, rate. Or D, latency. The answer is C, rate. And the thing that gives it away is how many behaviors are occurring per hour, per unit of time. The other ones, frequency would just be a number. Duration would just be the time or how long it happened. And latency would also just be a time. All right, last question. Let's go. Why is poor procedural fidelity and unreliable data collection a problem? Select the best answer from these choices. A, it makes graphs harder to read. B, it reflects poorly on the technician. C, it can lead to incorrect treatment decisions and wasted learning time. D, it violates the definition of continuous measurement. The answer is C, it can lead to incorrect treatment decisions and wasted learning time. All right, we did it. We finished section A. How do you feel? How are you doing? Just checking in. You doing good? You're gonna be great. You're gonna do great. For your efforts, here's some amazing reinforcement. Yeah, I know, super cute. The next video in this series is gonna be behavior assessment. The link to the playlist is down below if you're following the playlist. Otherwise, at the end screen, you'll be able to click on the next video. All right, that does it for this video. Hope you learned something. Consider giving a like or a comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. I'll catch you in the next one.
I was needing someone when you brought me home. I was looking for trouble.